I'm Jamie, and this is Jamie Leigh Art, where I like to talk about everything related to art that I find interesting and I hope you'll find interesting too. And specifically that means painting time-lapse videos, Lightbox videos, weird art videos, art history, and anything else that I think would be fun or interesting to talk about. If you hear noises, I have dogs and they make noises, especially during my videos. Today's video is going to be a Lightbox video, and the idea for this video actually came from one of you. On my last Lightbox video, there was a comment left asking, can you use a Lightbox to help you with shading? And of course the answer is yes. You most certainly can use a Lightbox to help you with shading. And that is what this video today is going to be. Everything that I can tell you about how to improve your shading using your Lightbox. And then we'll talk about some of the different types of shading that you can do, then the supplies that you'll need, and then I'll do several photographs. And as I use the Lightbox to do those drawings, I'll talk about shading and the different ways you can shade by demonstrating it through those photographs. So let's start all the way back at the beginning and talk about, okay, what do we mean by shading? So when you make a drawing, most of the time it's going to be with a pencil or something like that. When you draw the outline of what your photograph or what your freehand drawing is, that is the line drawing. And if you just stick with doing a line drawing and don't go any further than that, you may have noticed that your drawing looks very flat. And there's a difference between a drawing that looks very flat and one that looks very realistic and almost sometimes three-dimensional. And the difference is light and dark. And that is what shading does. Shading is the dark parts of the drawing that represent the shadows in the photograph or the real life object or person that you're looking at. So shading is just how you can show the gradient from sort of dark to very dark to show the shadows that help make a subject of your drawing become more and more real rather than flat. So shading is incredibly important, and it can also be very difficult to get correct. And so this is a reason why using a Lightbox to help you practice your shading techniques can be incredibly helpful. It can help you see where the shadows of a particular photograph are located once you have it on your Lightbox, and then it will make it much easier for you to mimic that shading on your drawing. And there's a lot of pitfalls that people run into when they're trying to learn how to do shading correctly. For example, shading in a drawing means that some areas are very lightly shaded because those are either closer to the light source or they're not that far away from the lightest part of the drawing. Now, other areas in a drawing are going to be very heavily shaded because the shadows in that particular area are very dark. And if you don't get the light tones and the dark tones correct, they kind of all turn out to look like midtones. And then again, you're left with a flat painting and people get kind of frustrated wondering, okay, but I put in shading, but it still isn't working. So when you use the Lightbox, you can see how dark your shading needs to be or how light your shading needs to be in order to help define whatever it is you're drawing. Now you can use this on portraits, you can use this on pet drawings, you can use this on landscapes, drawing objects. Basically every type of artwork uses some form of shading. Even abstracts sometimes use shading. So it's something that applies to any type of art that you're doing. And depending what you're doing, you can use shading in any type of medium. Oil painting, acrylic painting, watercolor, gouache, pencil drawing, colored pencil, marker. You can learn how to do shading using any type of art material. So also today what I'm going to do is show you some different techniques of shading so that you can shade using the style that feels most comfortable to you. For example, some artists will take a pencil and they'll do their shadings using different pencils. Some artists like to do colored pencils and the shading is done using the different colors of the colored pencils. Some people draw in pen and ink, and in the shading on those types of drawings, you cannot just scribble in because it would be too dark. So they use basically like a bunch of hashtags or dots or lines, vertical lines or diagonal lines to represent the shaded areas of that particular drawing. So there's many different types of techniques you can also do for So let's talk about the materials you will need in order to do a shaded drawing. Now, I am a firm believer in the idea that you do not need to run out and get a bunch of fancy materials in order to make a really nice drawing or artwork. So you can start with the most basic, which would literally be a piece of printer paper, a pencil, even a number 2 pencil, and an eraser and a Lightbox. Like, that's literally the basic stuff that you're going to need in order to make a drawing, and it can be a very nice drawing. Now, do you want to do all your drawings this way? Possibly not. There are some things that you can use that will either be A, helpful, or B, make your drawing last longer because you're using better materials. But if you're just practicing, there is no shame in just grabbing a pencil and a piece of paper and trying a bunch of different stuff. Not spending a lot of money. You don't have to run out and buy supplies. Now, if you do happen to want a few supplies, I've got some supplies here that we're going to be using for the drawings that I'm going to demonstrate later. So let's go through some supplies that you could have on hand if you want to do a shaded drawing and you want to have the best tools possible. The first things you're probably going to want to have are pencils. Now, you don't have to use pencils. You can use a marker, you can use a Sharpie, you can use a pen. But I prefer to use pencils, and that's what I'm going to use. You do you. So I do like to have a mechanical pencil, which is the kind that you can click and the lead comes out. These are smaller and much more precise. So I do like to start with these for doing my initial lines. And then you could also get some pencils like these, which is a set of pencils. And these pencils, all of them are numbered on the end with the letter B. So I have here a 2B, an HB, a 6, a 7, and a 9B. So what does that mean? Basically, it goes from HB, which is the hardness and the lightness of the pencil, all the way to the 9B, which is a softer, darker pencil. So basically, you can look at these and go, well, when I start, I want a lighter line, so I'm going to pick maybe an HB or a 2B. But when I'm doing my shading and I want to be able to make it smoother and darker, I might go up here in the 7 or the 9B. So this helps you control the darkness of the line, the thickness of the line, and how your pencil is going to make marks on your paper to give you the kind of shading that you want. The next thing you probably will want to have is some sort of pencil sharpener and a gum eraser. You could also have a regular eraser, but the gum eraser is this gray squishy eraser. It comes as a little like square in the package, but then you take it out and you can smush it into any shape you want. In order to do shaded drawings, these things are fantastic because you can make a little point, you can erase a very precise area, you can lay it on a part of your drawing and pull up and it'll pull off some of the pencil mark. They're just very, very helpful to have. The pencil sharpener, the gum eraser. And then if you're really wanting to do subtle shading and you really want to get a really good gradient from light to dark in your shadow areas, you're going to want these. These are actually very cheap if you go to, I think they even sell them at Walmart now, but if you go to a hobby store, they're called tortillions. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but that's what they're called. Or they're just paper sticks, basically. And they come in different sizes and lengths, but basically what these do is when you make your pencil lines, you go over it with these and it will help smooth out your pencil lines and it'll help give you a nice gradient from dark to light, light to dark. Once you've used these and seen how it helps with the shading, you'll probably be convinced they're kind of magical because they are. They're very, very helpful to have if you want to get really nice shading on your drawings. And then of course, if you want to use something other than pencils, like you could use colored pencils, which I have some back there behind me. And then you could use a pen, you could use a drawing marker, you could even use a Sharpie. You can shade with a Sharpie, believe it or not. It can be done. So just whatever materials you have on hand are okay, but depending on the type of drawing you want to make and how archival, I guess you would say, you want it to be. Archival just means that the painting or the drawing or the artwork will last a much longer time if you use materials that are designed to last a long time. If you're just going to use a number 2 pencil and a piece of printer paper, that drawing's going to fade over time, especially if it's near sunlight or it's not kept, even if it is kept behind glass, but if it's not protected somehow, that drawing will fade, so it won't have longevity. Which leads us to also you want to have paper You can use sketch paper, you can use drawing paper, you can use regular printer paper, whatever you have on hand. If you want this to be a drawing that lasts longer, you'll obviously want to get a pad of specific drawing paper that is meant to last. If you don't care and you're just practicing, whatever paper you have on hand is perfectly fine to use. And in fact, when I'm doing this right here, I'm just going to use some printer paper as well. So then of course you're going to want to have your actual light box. So this is the light box I will be using. As you can see, it is very thin. The light box I started out using, you may have seen in my other videos, is tilted. What is that word? It has a more tilted surface, but this is seems to be like the new style of light box that most places have now, which is a flat light box, and you can touch once and it's at the lowest setting, and then you just keep touching to make it brighter until it turns back off. So that happens to be the one that I have. And the other thing you might want to have is some masking tape. I use this, as I say in every video, to tape my reference photo and my drawing paper to the light box so they don't move around when I'm trying to draw. That is super important because if you're doing a light box drawing and your paper shifts, you're going to mess up a whole big part of your drawing and it's going to be very frustrating. Okay, the next item that you're going to need if you want to do a light box drawing is you're going to need a photograph. You can get your photograph from a couple different places. Number one, if it's a photograph that you've actually personally taken, you can just print it out on a piece of paper from your computer or your camera, and then you can use that as your reference. Perfectly fine. I've done many photographs of my own. So that's possibility number one, is just using your own photograph. Number two is you can go online and you can go to a photo website and you can download and print out a picture from one of the photo sharing websites. Now, I prefer to use someplace like Unsplash. They have many free use photos. You don't have to pay to get the photograph. The photographers for that site offer up their photographs for free, and if you use them in certain areas, they just, they like you to have credit toward them. Basically, I have noticed recently on Unsplash that some of them have a watermark, but there's still plenty of photographs available for use through unsplash.com. So I do tend to get a lot of my photographs from there just because they do say on the site that you're allowed to take these photographs and use them for basically whatever purpose you're wanting to use them for. Just don't resell the photograph. That is obviously ethical. Don't sell somebody else's photographs as your own. But you can take them and use them in, whatever way you wish, and then just credit the person that took the photograph. I got my photographs from unsplash.com. If you have another website that you are comfortable getting photographs from, then go there, find a photograph that you want to do, and print it out, and it'll be ready to go for creating a drawing from it using the Lightbox. Now, most types of photographs have some shadows or what will become the shading in your drawings. Dookie, do you want up? Hey buddy, come here. This guy wants up. All right. However, you can't sit on my lap. You can't sit on my lap, buddy. I'm sorry. Let's go over in the window. There you go, babe. There's always a doggy-o. Good boy. That's a good boy. You found a website that you want to get photographs from. You may be wondering, okay, what am I going to draw? Well, you can draw whatever you want, but most photographs and most photograph sharing websites are gonna have photos that have shaded or shadowy areas in the photograph so that you can use those to practice. I'm gonna do in this video 3 different types of photographs, so that way whatever it is that you're interested, you can kind of have a representation. So I'm gonna do 1 portrait, 1 object, and then 1 natural item. So I have a photograph of a cup of coffee for the object. I have a photograph of a person's face for the portrait. And then I have a photo of a leaf for the nature one. So that'll help us shade with a variety of different things. So I hope this will help you see that the Lightbox can also help you with building your skills as an artist. Hopefully you can start to see as we go through these photographs that using the Lightbox to help you do that will help you feel a lot more confident in knowing how to shade your drawing. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the drawing part of the video. Before we start shading, let's talk about shading. There are some different types of shading that you could do, and I'll show you what type I'm going to use and then some other styles that you can play around with either now or when you do this Lightbox exercise again. So I've got a 9B pencil. I'm going to turn it to the side, and then I'm just going to start out dark and rub it on the paper, gradually lightening up the pressure so that it's going from dark to light. Okay, that's a basic shading right there. And then I've grabbed the pencil. This is an HB, which is a harder, lighter pencil, doing the same thing, starting out dark, lightening up the pressure as I go. So then you have a gradient for both of those from dark to light, and you can see what different pencils shade like. Now here I have my blending stick, and you can see what happens when you use a blending stick over the shaded area is that it really pushes that pencil into the paper and smooths out the gradient. And it will do the same thing on the other HB pencil shading as well. So to use the blending stick, you would just use it just like you would a regular pencil. Just go over your marks that you make, push that pencil into the paper, the grain of the paper, so that way it smooths out. Now I have a pen, and I'm just making some lines. You can do upward and downward motions, you can do cross hatching, you can do diagonal lines. So when you're drawing with a pen for the darker areas of your drawing, you just go with your pen marks, and you can space them out further for lighter and get them closer together to make it darker. There's some more of that cross hatching. You could use dots, start out closer together for a darker area, and then gradually spread out your dots as you go to lighten the shading. Here is what it looks like if you were to just put your hash marks very close together. That's a darker area of shading. And then you could even use a marker, a Sharpie. So this will create some very dark shading. You could use lines, you can use squiggles, you can use dots, you can use a combination. Obviously with the Sharpie, you're going to leave yourself very little room for error. There's not going to be any erasing or fixing if you happen to mess up. That's the one downfall about using a pen, a Sharpie, a marker. But again, you can do the same thing as with the pen. Do dots, do lines, do cross-hatching. Any of these types of shading will add some visual interest to your drawing if you don't want it to just look blended, if you want it to have some more texture to it. And here I'm just showing you real quick with my mechanical pencil. You can even shade with this. You can put your lines real close together. You can get very precise areas with this tiny lead that this pencil has. We're going to start with drawing and shading this simple cup of coffee. I'm going to start with the line drawing using my mechanical pencil. The first thing to think about when you're doing a drawing that you're going to shade is the pressure of the line that you're doing. So as you can see, I started out with a little bit of a darker line where you can see the shadow is going around the cup, but I lightened it a little bit on the handle. This is a very helpful thing to do if you're going to be shading your drawing, because if you outline your entire drawing in a very dark, heavy line, but then some of the areas that you're shading are very light, you're going to have trouble either removing that dark line, or all of your dark tones and light tones will be a little bit off because you did your outline too dark. And that's one of the first things that can really help improve your drawing when you go ahead to do your shading, is just really paying attention to the lines that you use when you go ahead and draw your initial drawing. Even if you're using Lightbox or just drawing freehand, it doesn't matter. Pay attention to how dark or light the line that you're drawing needs to be in order to get the look that you're wanting. Something you may notice is that I actually drew an outline for the shadow in this photo. So you can see that under the mug, there's an actual shadow where the light is hitting the front part of the mug, and then the back part of the mug is darker because there's not as much light back there. So there's a cast shadow on the surface, which I'm assuming is a table. It's important when you're drawing your initial drawing that you actually add in the shadows, like that cast shadow, or if you're drawing an object or a figure, make sure that you mark where the shadow areas are. You'll see that happening in the other two drawings I do. We're going to fill in the area where the shadows go, for example on the face that I draw later, and on this mug here there's a couple shadow areas that are going to be important because otherwise it's going to look like that mug is just floating out in the ether. So that shadow really helps to ground the mug to the table, and you definitely want to include that. So tip number 2 for shading is to make sure that you put the shadows that you see in the photo or the subject that you're drawing, include the shadow when you first start. That way you don't have to guess at where it is later. I grabbed a 6B pencil, so not too light but not too dark either, to start out just filling in my shadows. And that's basically what you want to do, is just go to your shadow areas and fill them in with your pencil or whatever you've decided to use. And then here I'm transferring to a 2B, so I have a lighter shadow right there on the handle, and so I don't want to be as dark or heavy with that shadow because that will throw off the drawing when I get into trying to make the lights light and the darks dark if I have a too dark shadow right there. So choosing the right kind of pencil can help, and you can switch back and forth between several different pencils as you fill in your shadows if you have several pencils available. And so the part where you're filling in the actual shadow areas is basically just going through the drawing, outlining a little bit the edge of the shadow area, filling it in with your pencils. Here I'm grabbing the 9B pencil, which is my darkest color, and I made sure it had a really sharp point. And one thing you can do to shade large areas is turn the pencil on the side like I did, and then you're going to be shading using the whole lead of the pencil rather than just the tip. So that kind of gives you a softer shading rather than a pointy shading where you're going to have to fill in painstakingly. This can help you cover a larger area of shadow more quickly. So that's another good tip. If you have a large area where you're shading, you can turn your pencil on your side. You can shade by doing what I'm doing, which is just filling in the whole area. You can do squiggle lines, you can do cross hatching or lines. There really is no correct way to shade. It just depends on what you're wanting to do. As for myself on here, what I'm wanting to do is fill in that whole shadow area, and then I'm going to use my blending stump to blend it out. That's the look I'm going for. That is one look, but it's also not the only look. Let's talk about this transition shadow between the really dark shadow and then the more lighter side of the cup. As you can see, there is shadow as the cup comes around into the light, but it's not as dark as what's back by the handle. So the way to handle that when you're shading is to look at how the gradient goes from dark to light, and to make sure that you either use a pencil that is less dark or use less pressure when you're shading in that area, so that you can see on this mug there is a dark shadow back towards the handle, and as the cup curves around toward the light, we use a little bit less pressure, a little bit lighter color, but there is still shadow there.
and it gives that cup the illusion that it is rounded rather than flat, which can really help with the 3D effect and making the object or subject of your drawing much more realistic. So anywhere that there is a dark shadow going into a lighter area, there's always going to be that transition shadow that you'll want to include in your drawing. Now, to help make that shadow as smooth as possible from dark to light, you can see I grabbed my blending stick and I just brought that dark color from the back part of the mug into the lighter part of the mug. And using the blending stump to do this rather than the pencil itself makes that shadow very soft and very light, because there is shadow there, but it's a lighter shadow than you could really get with a pencil. You'd have to really concentrate and put very light pressure in order to get that same effect with using the pencil. But with the blending stump, since there is already some pencil on the stump itself from when it's been used before, it can take that color that's there and kind of spread it out into the lighter part of the cup very softly, and it makes a really nice light shadow, adding to the illusion that this cup is a round or a rounded object. And I'm grabbing my blending stump and doing that same thing up in that upper area where the cup curves around and you can see into the top part of the cup. You can use the blending stump to get that shadow really soft, and then go back in with your pencil if you want to define the edge of the cup. And so that's another way that you can work on the shadows. You can go back and forth between a blending stump and a pencil. Use the pencil to add your lines or your shading or your squiggles or whatever it is you're doing. Go get your blending stump and then blend it out on the edge areas so that it really softens that and makes it, instead of a hard line, it's going to be a soft fade into lightness. Now I'm going to the top of the mug with my pencil and see how there's that dark little triangle shadow at the top edge of the cup where the actual lip of the cup casts a shadow onto the coffee in the cup. So I'm filling that in with the pencil, and then I'm going over the actual coffee in the cup to kind of fill in that area, but I'm not doing a full shading. I'm just kind of going over it lightly and not filling in absolutely everything, because in the coffee there's some light and darker areas. So then I will grab my blending stump again, and I'm going to blend all of that coffee and shadow area. Another helpful tip for when you're shading: if you have done your pencil outline, your shading, your blending stick, and you're noticing that everything looks a little bit fuzzy, because the blending stump will blur the areas where you're using it. So it might make all of your edges look a little bit fuzzy. Something you can do is you can go back in with your pencil and just define the lines that you want to look a little bit sharper. And there's going to be a balance between areas that look a little bit fuzzy or blurred and other areas that look a little bit harder and sharper. And that's what will also help give the illusion of depth in your drawing, because some of the parts of the object or the object itself will have hard lines and other areas won't. Other areas will be a blended area into a darker or a lighter color. Another way you can help define those edges that you need defined is to grab that gum eraser, and you're just going to go along the areas that you want to remove any of that fuzzy pencil that bled out into the light area. And so that can help give you a really defined line and help separate the object that you're drawing from the background or the area behind it. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm just going in with some pencil, some gum eraser, just cleaning up some areas that need better definition, that need a sharper edge, or that need some of that fuzzy pencil from the blending stump removed just a little bit. You'll notice in some drawings that you do that there are going to be some areas of the drawing that are basically white. And if you've been going over your drawing using pencil and shading and that sort of thing, you might notice that the white areas have kind of gotten a little bit lost, and that's where the gum eraser can be your best friend. You can take your gum eraser, go back into those areas that are going to be the lightest parts of your drawing, and you can remove the little bits of pencil that are in those areas, clean up the white areas so that they look much brighter, and it gives a nice contrast between those dark shadows and then the areas that are highlighted in the drawing, again adding to that illusion of depth. So just go through with your gum eraser, or if you just have a regular eraser, it will work as well. You might not be able to get as precise as you could with the gum eraser or as subtle, but you can still do that. So I'm just cleaning up around the edges with the gum eraser, adding in those white areas that are the brightest parts of the drawing, etc. And here's our quick finished shaded sketch of a coffee mug. I hope you found this exercise useful, and I hope that the tips that I gave you helped. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to another object where I'm going to give you more shading tips on a new photograph. Here we go with drawing number 2, which is a photograph of a simple leaf. Looks like it's laying on a deck or a wood, some sort of wood surface. The reason I picked this one is because of that sharp shadow outline at the bottom and side of the leaf. So that'll give some practice with doing more shadows. There's some shading on that side of the leaf where the sunlight isn't hitting it as much as it is on the other side. So I'm going to start out the same way pretty much I always do, just using my mechanical pencil. I'm going to outline the leaf itself. And I wanted to take a moment also to talk about this particular Lightbox that I'm using. I showed you in the beginning. It is a different Lightbox from, this is why I'm talking about it right now. It's a different Lightbox from the one I was using in my other Lightbox videos. It's fairly new to me. I do like the flat style of these. However, the design of this one is a little frustrating because, as you can see a few moments ago, the Lightbox turned off because the little on button is over on the other side of where my hand is, and when I'm drawing, sometimes I'll hit that button and it just turns it off. So I wish they'd put the button in a different spot, maybe on the side. That way when you're drawing, you don't hit it. I think at one point in one of the other drawings, I turned the Lightbox, so that way where my hand rests, that's the frustrating thing about this particular Lightbox. You have to either place it so that that button is not where your hand is going to be moving, or you have to be really conscious of shutting the dang thing off as you're drawing, which can get a little frustrating. Other than that, I give it a pretty good review. It's just they should have thought more about that when they were thinking about where to put that button at, I guess. So back to the actual point of this, which is the drawing and shading of this leaf. You can see that I'm actually defining where the shadows in the leaf are. There's some real dark areas. Here's my 7B, which is going to be a little bit darker and softer of a pencil. So I'm going in that fairly dark shadow at the bottom of the leaf and just filling it in with that pencil. Now that I did all the shadows that are underneath the leaf, that'll help separate it from the background. I'm taking that same pencil, I'm filling in that darkest shadow on the side of the leaf, and then I'm going to go throughout the leaf itself and fill in the shadow areas. As I said in the last one that we did on the coffee cup, it really helps when you're planning out your drawing and doing your drawing that you put those shadows in when you're first doing your drawing. The line drawing itself is important because that gives you the entire drawing, but adding in the shadows and even lightly sketching in the light areas to remind yourself later what those areas are and where they are is going to be really helpful. So here I'm just going through, I'm adding in the veins of that leaf, adding in the little shadow areas, and here's where you can use some of those little tricks that I told you about in the very beginning of the different shadings. Some of these little areas are just going to be like squiggles, dots, and you can either at the end leave those areas that way, or you can go over them with the shading stick blending tool and kind of make them a little more fuzzy, a little more blurry. That's totally up to you as the artist. You know, once you have your photograph, that's a photograph of an object or a person, and that's the, you know, the way that the person that took that photograph wanted that to look. But as an artist, when you're using that photograph as a reference, you have basically all the artistic freedom in the world to do with that photograph what you want. You can stick to being very, very true to the photograph itself, making it very realistic, or you can, you know, kind of go a little abstract with certain things. You can add a little fun elements into what you're doing. It's totally up to you. You don't have to stick to exactly what you see if you don't want to. My art mentor always tells me, you're the artist. You're the one that's doing this. You have all the creative freedom that you either want or don't want to be able to make decisions about how you want your drawing or painting or artwork to look. So have fun with things. You know, if you're practicing like we are right now, you may want to stick more to the photograph as it is. However, even when you're practicing, you can try out different little things that you're wanting to try in the practice drawing, so that way later on when you're doing your own artwork, you know how that stuff works and you can use it for your own artwork. That's why the Lightbox is so great for practicing different things, because, so to speak, even though it's a Lightbox, you can color outside the lines. As an artist, you always have the option to stick with what you're doing and then make it a little bit more creative based on how comfortable you feel with doing that. You know, when I was a beginner artist and I was trying to do my own artworks, I felt very insecure about my drawings and I just hadn't practiced a lot. So I didn't really feel comfortable doing a lot of creative things because I didn't have a good skill set to start with. I was still working on that. So wherever you are as an artist, feel free to take baby steps if you need to, but be a little more creative. Try some dots, try some squiggles, try to shade in a way that feels most comfortable to you, how you want your drawing to turn out, and then go from there. All right, that little pep talk is over. As you can see, I grabbed my blending stump and I was going over the shadows and just smoothing them out, blending the edges a little bit so that they're not quite so sharp. And I'm taking my smaller blending stump and going over those little areas of shadow and smoothing out all of the pencil lines so you don't see the lines themselves from the pencil. It kind of smooths it all together and makes it look more like a shadow and not something you've just drawn in. Now, something you might be wondering, or something you might have asked yourself before, is how do I know when my drawing is finished, or how do I finish my drawing? If you've ever talked to an artist before, they may tell you realistically a drawing has never actually been finished. It's just done to the point where you're willing to let go of it. So, as unhelpful as that answer is, it also is up to you to determine when your drawing or artwork is actually finished. So what I am doing pretty much from here on out is just going back to the drawing, back to the photo, checking any areas that I see that I want to improve, anything I might want to add to the drawing that's not there already, fixing anything that needs fixed. So we can take a look at the drawing as it is right now. If you're just doing this for practice and you want to call that done, you can certainly do that. However, if you want to bring this drawing to a more completed stage, then the way to do that is to check your reference photo, work on any of the shadows that you might want to darken, that you might want to blur the edges of. Use your gum eraser to add in any lighter parts, remove any of like the overspray, but it's more like an over draw of when you blended. Go back and add in any sharper pencil lines that you might want to have in there if you've gone over it with the eraser or the blending stick and you've lost some of the sharpness. For example, with this leaf, you could go as far as you want to go, adding in the veins of the leaf very specifically all over the leaf as they are in the drawing to make it look incredibly accurate and realistic. You can add in a few areas like I have done to give the impression that there are shadows and veins and that sort of thing. It's really all up to you to determine how long you want to go before you decide that your artwork is actually finished. Something that I'm going to do here is just kind of go through, check the photo, add in anything that feels necessary, and then also I will add in just a touch of the background area. If you wanted to make this a finished drawing and you wanted to work on the background as well, you could certainly do that. And then you would have the impression of a full piece of wood in the back to kind of set your leaf on. I really just hinted at it here just to give you the idea of how you can go about giving just a little bit of a hint that this leaf is laying on something and not just floating out in space, basically. So after I'm done doing the little veins that are here, adding in all the ones that I feel are necessary to add, using my mechanical pencil so I can be a little bit more precise, then I go and I just add some of these wood grain lines that will really give the impression that this leaf is sitting on a piece of wood. And even just that hint, you can see, gives that impression. And so here we have the finished leaf practice drawing. And like I said, you can take this further if you want to. That is certainly up to you, but for this video, we're going to move on. Now we're going to tackle a portrait. Here is my reference photograph. I'm just taping it down, as always, to my surface, and then here is my drawing paper. And the other two things that we have done today are a little more simple, maybe a little bit more easy. I know that people often feel a little bit intimidated by doing a portrait of a person. There's a real trick to getting an accurate representation of a person, so it can be a little bit intimidating. But for this, we're going to take this photograph of a girl, and I picked this one in particular because there are a lot of shadows here. Her face is well lit on one side, and the other side of her face is very much in shadow. So this is a good one to use to practice adding in those shadow areas, doing the light areas, and giving her face the realistic look of this photograph, but doing it with pencil instead of photography. Now, when I started my lines, I actually didn't start with my mechanical pencil this time because I started with the hair, and her hair in the photograph is very dark. I'm assuming it's either very dark brown or black, and there's a few little highlights in it from the light, but other than that, her hair is going to be pretty dark. So I went ahead and I used one of my regular drawing pencils, and as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm just filling in the very dark shadow on the hair that touches the side of her face. I'm adding in what the hair looks like on the outside of the hair, kind of giving it some long flowy lines because that mimics the appearance of hair. Going in with that same pencil on the face and just filling in those dark shadow areas on the side of the nose, under the nose, all of the areas of the face that have the darker shadow. You want to make sure all of those are filled in to start with. And I did this using this softer, darker pencil. And you'll see as we go on that I'm going to switch between pencils depending on what I'm working on. So you're basically doing the same exact thing that we did on the cup and that we did on the leaf. All a face is different areas of shadow and light, and you just have to be careful that you're filling in the dark areas with the right level of darkness and leaving room for those lights, so then it will create the different shapes on the face, which is all shading really is. It's just shapes. A face can be much more intimidating because you're actually representing a person and you want it to look correct. So you might have noticed on that photograph that she has a very heavy shadow on the side of her face. So I already started filling in what will become that shadow area. I'm taking my blending stick and I'm blending that dark shadow. Don't panic when you see how dark the shadow on the side of the face is. I promise that's what it looks like in the photograph, and that's what's going to make your drawing of this photograph look correct, is including the dark shadows as they are in that photo. Once we go through and add in details and areas of light, I promise it will make a lot of sense to do it the same way we've done on the other ones. So you add in your lines, you can turn your pencil on its side and add in some shading. You can go through with the blending stick. Now for the hair, I turn the pencil on the side again because it'll give a good dark coverage of the dark area of hair. It will save you some time to turn your pencil and just shade that way. I'm not being very fussy with how the hair looks at the moment because it's going to change. Basically right now what you're doing is you're just adding in that dark color. But do make sure that you follow the contours of the hair as you see it in the photograph. So on the top of her head, you'll notice I kind of went sideways. When I went alongside her face, I go down because that's the way the hair is flowing. So you do want to pay attention to how the actual hair in the photograph goes, so that way you can mimic those directions with your pencil. Here I've grabbed my mechanical pencil again, and I'm just kind of doing some little wispy hairs at the edges because that will help it be much more realistic. Everybody's hair is not completely a smooth block. It's, you know, individual pieces of hair, and sometimes they're frizzy, sometimes certain pieces stick out and some pieces don't. So you definitely want to make sure to pay attention to how that looks in your photograph. I smoothed it all out with the blending stick. And a lot of times shading is adding your initial shadows and light areas and then kind of going back and refining everything. So here I'm working on the eyes, darkening the things that need darkening. Inside the nostrils are always one of the darkest parts on the face, so you add in a very dark shadow there. Underneath the lip, because she has a bottom lip that is pretty full, so right underneath that there's going to be a pretty good shadow. That side of her nose is going to be very shaded because of the way the light's hitting her face. And then you can take your blending stick and smooth what you've done. Around the eyes, it's very helpful to use a very fine pencil, mechanical pencil, for the little eyelash details. Use a dark pencil for her pupils because that's going to be the darkest part of her eye. And now here we're going to go with a trick that might be very helpful for you when you're doing a shaded drawing. Now, as you might have noticed, I held up that pencil. That is a colored pencil, not a graphite pencil. It is just a black colored pencil. You can grab one that you have. I believe I'm using here a Prismacolor black colored pencil. See how that shadow on her face is extremely dark, almost black? You're not going to be able to get that black color with your graphite pencil because graphite tends to be shiny. You may have noticed in different parts of this video, trying to film the graphite, you could just see the shine off it. Now with a colored pencil, a black colored pencil, you can go over those shadow areas and you will get a much darker, much more black shadow than you ever could with that graphite pencil. Now there are a couple things to think about when you use this trick. Number one, you're using a colored pencil, so you're not going to be able to erase. So you want to make sure that where you put the colored pencil, you're confident that that's where you want that black color to be, because you're not going to be able to take it away without pretty much ruining that part of your drawing, especially if you're using printer paper like I am right now. But anywhere in this drawing where there is some very dark shadow, like at the corners of her mouth, under her lip, under her chin, that dark side of her face, beside her nose, all of those places you can take a black colored pencil and go ahead and just fill in the dark with the colored pencil, just like you have been doing with the graphite. Now with the colored pencil, you're not going to be able to use the blending stick because colored pencil does not react the same way the graphite does. So again, this is a trick that you can use, but you do have to be a little more careful with thinking about what you're doing before you do it. For example, I'm using fairly heavy pressure and putting some real good black shadow right there at her neck. And now I'm going into the hair with that as well. This will help make your hair that you're doing on your drawing look much darker in the areas where the light isn't hitting it, which will make the highlights look much lighter, which will give the impression of, you know, chunks of hair or long pieces of hair that are either in the dark or in the light, and it'll make it much more hair-like. However, when you get to the areas using this colored pencil where you have to gradually go from the very dark to the very light, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to how much pressure you're putting on the pencil, and you're going to want to start very dark in the dark areas like I am here, but as you move out away from that dark area, make sure that you're lifting up the pencil, applying less pressure, so that way you'll still get a good gradient from dark to light and not just a heavy dark line where your colored pencil ends, because when you go back and try to make that softer, it'll be frustrating. So try to make sure that you're thinking about your edges as you're using the colored pencil. Don't just go real dark and then stop and then not leave yourself any way to lighten that up. Against the face, especially where that light is coming across the top part of her hair, but it's not reaching the area of her hair that's right beside her face, that's going to be very dark. So that's a great place to use this colored pencil trick. And as you can see from how the light is hitting this drawing, the colored pencil areas are not reflecting that light the way the graphite is. So it's making your black areas look much more black. Another thing you can do, I took a eraser from my mechanical pencil, and I'm just erasing long strips in the hair to give the impression of those long strands of hair. So you can go through with an eraser and add those strips of very light, almost white strands that are hitting the light, and then you can go through again with your colored pencil and go alongside those areas and add in some dark. Here's what I was talking about. When I mentioned lightening up the pressure so you can make the darker shadow blend into the lighter shadow areas without having a heavy line where the darker shadow ends. And you can do that simply just by changing how hard you push down on the pencil as you're shading. Now I'm doing what I had talked about. I'm just going through and filling in areas that should have some dark to them. As you can see in the hair, it's starting to make it look more like actual chunks or strands of hair. So that adds a little bit more of that realism that you might be going for if you're wanting to make a realistic portrait. Hair is one of those funny things that as a beginning artist, many people don't know how to handle hair. They either go one of two ways. The first thing a lot of beginning artists do is just fill in the whole entire hair with one color. Let's say somebody has brown hair, they're just going to do all brown. Well, then you have a lot of work ahead of you to differentiate, the browns, the lighter areas that are sometimes other colors like yellow, or even some really light strands can look white in certain light. So if you just put a mass of one color, it's not going to look like hair. It's going to look more like a blob. The other thing that beginning artists do is, because they do know that hair is made up of thousands of individual strands, they're going to try to go ahead and draw each individual strand of hair, and that is very painstaking and time consuming, and also a bit of a waste of time, because as an artist we are given tools to help us imitate the look of something without having to, go ahead and actually draw 1,000 strands of hair. So some of the tricks and tips that artists who have been doing art for a while use is to go ahead and do some larger areas of color, do some individual strands, and do some in between stuff. That way the overall look gives you the effect of hair without having it be a blob, or B, having to spend hours doing individual tiny strands of hair. Again, I've picked up the black colored pencil, and I'm going into the eye area, and I'm filling in any areas where a really dark color is necessary. The pupils directly under the eyelids, and I filled in a tiny bit where the eyelid fold is at. And so once you have some of your darks that you've done, you have some of your light areas, you can go back and look at your reference photo and see, okay, do I need to add in more of a dark color? Do I need to use my gum eraser and erase some areas to make them lighter? What you're going for is you're wanting to have the light areas stand out and the dark areas be well defined. That way the whole thing has a lot of variation. Otherwise, you're going to have, again, a flat artwork, because all of your darks and lights, if you don't go dark enough or light enough, are just going to turn out to be midtones, which is that grayish in between. And then once again, everything will kind of fade together. So if you're noticing that your drawing is starting to look a little bit same, the same colors in all of the parts of it, then that will be your first clue that you need to go in and either deepen your shadows or lighten your lights. Here I decided to give her eyebrows some of that darker color definition. If you'll notice, they were kind of blending into her forehead and not really standing out as the eyebrows of a person with dark hair should. So again, with that colored pencil, I went in and instead of just blocking in a color, I did them in short strokes to mimic how eyebrow hairs would actually look. So don't go and just color in darkness. Try to make the lines that you use match the area that you're working on. I'm taking out a little bit of the color underneath the eyebrows to highlight that brow bone, because that area is further out, so it will touch the light. I'm using my blending stick to blend any pencil lines around the eyes that need to be softened. And then this is the part of the drawing where you've pretty much got everything well established, so you can go through and just add in those finer details. For example, there's dark and light areas in the lips. Lips normally have some tiny lines, they're not just smooth. So you can go ahead and look at your reference photo and add in those lip lines. That will help make the lips look, number one, more realistic, and number two, a little bit more rounded, which lips generally are. And if you draw those lip lines with a little bit of a rounded curve, then that will add to the illusion that those lips are coming out of her face. I'm not going to get too fussy about, for example, this shirt that she's wearing, because to me it's not really as important as the other areas of the drawing. And that's another one of those things that as an artist you can make those decisions. I'll go ahead and define the shirt a little bit so that you know that it's a shirt, but I really am not going to focus my attention on it too much, because you want the focus to be on her face, obviously. These lines here I'm drawing with a regular graphite pencil because I want them to be able to be softened. If I went ahead and did those with the colored pencil trick, then I would have a hard time softening that, because she does not have, you know, huge deep lines in her neck. She just has some kind of wrinkled areas where the skin has a little bit of a fold to it. I looked on my photo and I realized that part of her forehead is a little bit darker on that darker side of her face. So the blending stick is a perfect way to go in and add really soft dark areas rather than using your pencil, because there's already some pencil on that blending stick and it will transfer to the paper just by you rubbing into those areas. Here I decided to define the wings of her nose a little bit, give the tip of her nose a highlight, help that area be a little bit better defined. She has some shadow area under her eye on that lighter side of her face. Here's another little tip for you if you are struggling with wanting to see some of the finer details to put in your drawing. You can either print out a second version of your photo or just pull it up on your laptop like I have here. And I have my laptop beside me, so I just can look at my Lightbox, look over at my laptop, and then I have another reference to give me some of those finer details that I'm wanting to add into the drawing. Here's another trick that will really add that fun final detail to your drawing if you're wanting to have some really poppin' whites. Use a white pen. That one I have is a Jelly Roll. There's other versions of it. Just any pen that has white ink. You can use this to add in the highlights in the eyes, as I'm doing right here. It makes those bright highlights really pop. And then anywhere that you need some pure white, for example, the brightest part of the face, which is the tip of the nose and a little bit up the bridge of the nose, add in a little bit of white there. You can add a bit of highlight to the top of the lip, catching the light. And then on that bottom lip area, there is some very bright highlight areas, and also that makes it look a little bit more of that wet lip look. I'm highlighting her inner corner of her eyes. And then you can also use this trick to give some very light strands of hair. One thing you can do before it dries is smudge it just a bit so you have just a touch of those strands. If you have the whole entire strand like that, it might make it look a little weird. So you definitely, if you're doing this in the hair, you want to use this sparingly. Don't go crazy and just do white strands all across the hair. Because that will kind of lose the effect. But it is a great trick to just give you that extra pop of detail and brightness that will really just add to your drawing and help it look more finished. And there you have it, a finished portrait using shading and some fun tips and tricks. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it helped you out and gave you some ideas for how you can work on your own shading in your own drawings. You can always save it to your watch later on your YouTube and go back to it if you didn't get a chance to go through all the sections. If you like this video, please give it a like. Leave me a comment below if it was helpful to you in any way, or if you have any suggestions for things you'd like me to cover using the Lightbox. If you would like to stick around for more Lightbox content, YouTube should be recommending another of my Lightbox videos at the end of this video. You can just go ahead and click on that to watch another one. I really appreciate you watching this video, and please subscribe if you would like to see more. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in my next video.